The rain in Los Angeles was relentless that night. It was the kind of heavy, pouring rain that the city rarely saw, turning the usually bright and sunny streets into reflective gray rivers. Inside the St. Jude's Medical Center, the atmosphere was just as chaotic. The emergency room was buzzing with the sounds of shouting, alarms, and the rapid squeak of rubber shoes against the polished linoleum floors. It was a Tuesday, which usually meant it was busy, but tonight felt different. The storm had driven everyone inside, from people with minor colds to those involved in serious car crashes on the slick highways. Dr. Elias Thorne walked down the long, brightly lit hallway with a clipboard in his hand. He was a man who carried himself with a lot of confidence, some might say too much. He was in his late 50s, with gray hair styled perfectly and a white coat that looked crisp and expensive. He was one of the best specialists in the hospital, and he knew it. He had treated movie stars, famous athletes, and powerful politicians. Over the years, this had made him a bit cynical. He had started to believe that the worth of a person was directly tied to the size of their bank account, or how many people recognized their face. He had lost his patience for the regular people who came through the ER, the ones who didn't have private insurance or fancy connections. To him, they were just numbers clogging up the system. Dr. Thorne was tired. He had been on his feet for 12 hours, and all he wanted was a cup of bad coffee and 10 minutes of silence. As he walked past the main waiting area, he stopped briefly to look out the glass doors at the storm. The automatic doors slid open with a whoosh, bringing in a gust of cold, wet wind. A man stepped inside from the downpour. Dr. Thorne glanced at him, his eyes narrowing critically. The man was soaked to the bone. He was wearing a heavy, dark leather motorcycle jacket that looked old and well-worn, not the kind of fashionable gear you saw in magazines. His jeans were wet and faded, tucked into heavy, scuffed black boots. On his head, he wore a black helmet with the visor pulled down, hiding his face completely. Water dripped from him onto the floor, forming a small puddle at his feet. The man didn't rush to the desk like most people did. He didn't scream for help or complain about the wait. He just stood there for a moment, shaking the water off his shoulders, looking around the crowded room. He seemed to be trying to be as small and invisible as possible, which Dr. Thorne found odd. Most people in pain wanted attention. The doctor watched as the man walked slowly to the reception desk. He was holding his right arm against his chest, wincing slightly with every step. Dr. Thorne shook his head slightly. "Another biker," he muttered under his breath. In his experience, motorcycle riders were usually reckless. They drove too fast in the rain, broke their bones, and then expected the hospital to fix them up for free. He assumed this man was no different. He looked like someone who probably worked a low-paying job, maybe a courier or a delivery driver. Someone who lived life on the edge and now had to pay the price for it. Dr. Thorne was about to turn away, head to the doctor's lounge when the head nurse, a kind woman named Clara, caught his eye. She looked frazzled, holding a stack of files. She waved him over. "Dr. Thorne," she said, sounding out of breath. "I'm sorry to bother you, but we need a consult in curtain 3. It's a wrist injury. Possible fracture." Elias sighed, checking his watch. "Can't a resident handle it?" "I'm about to go on break." "Looks complicated," Clara explained quickly. "The swelling is bad, and the patient is in a lot of pain. Plus, the waiting room is overflowing. The family in the next room is causing a scene, and honestly, I just need someone with your hands to take a quick look so we can either cast it or send him to imaging. Please, Elias, just 5 minutes." The doctor hesitated. He hated being pulled back in, especially for something as boring as a broken wrist. But he also knew that Clara wouldn't ask unless she was overwhelmed. "Fine," he agreed, his voice sharp. "But make it quick. And whoever it is, tell them to stop bleeding on the sheets if they can help it." Clara didn't laugh at his little joke. She just looked relieved. "Thank you. He's in room 3. He's a quiet one. Haven't had any trouble out of him." "Quiet is good," Dr. Thorne muttered, grabbing a fresh pair of gloves from the dispenser on the wall. "Quiet is usually poor." Dr. Thorne walked toward the examination rooms, his mind already drifting back to his own problems. He was thinking about his mortgage, his ex-wife, and the expensive car he had parked in the garage. He felt a sense of bitterness rising in his chest. Here he was, a brilliant surgeon, wasting his time on a nobody while people who could actually pay for his skills were waiting in private rooms upstairs. He reached curtain 3 and didn't bother knocking. He just whipped the curtain back with an aggressive snap of his wrist. The room was small and dimly lit. The smell of antiseptic hung in the air. Sitting on the edge of the narrow exam table was the man from the lobby. He still had his helmet on. The visor was up now, revealing a pair of intense dark eyes and a scruffy beard. He looked exhausted, deep lines of fatigue etched into his face. He was still wearing his wet jacket. Dr. Thorne walked in, letting the curtain fall shut behind him. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't smile. He just pulled a rolling stool over to the side of the bed and sat down, clicking his pen. "So," Thorne started, his tone dismissive. "Wrist, huh?" The man on the bed nodded slowly. He spoke softly, his voice raspy. "Yeah, I took a spill on my bike. The brakes locked up in the rain." Dr. Thorne grabbed the man's hand rough, calloused fingers and began to poke and prod at the wrist. The man flinched slightly but didn't pull away. "Typical," Thorne said, shaking his head as he examined the angry red swelling. "You guys think you own the road? You ride in weather like this, you're asking for it. Now look at you, wasting valuable resources." The man looked down at the floor, seeming to take the scolding without fighting back. "I know," he said quietly. "It was stupid. I'm sorry for the trouble." "Trouble?" Thorne laughed dryly. "You think this is trouble? This is my job. My job is to fix people who don't have enough sense to stay inside during a hurricane." The doctor looked over the man's clothes again. The leather jacket was quality, but it was old. The boots were beaten up. There were no flashy watches, no designer rings. This guy wasn't a movie star. He wasn't a producer. He was just a regular guy who probably didn't have a dime to his name. "Look," Dr. Thorne said, letting go of the hand and standing up. He crossed his arms, looking down at the patient. "I can order an X-ray, but that's going to take hours. The radiology department is backed up with actual emergencies. Honestly, it looks like a bad sprain or a simple hairline fracture. We can wrap it up, give you some ibuprofen, and you can go to a county clinic tomorrow to follow up. It'll save you a lot of money here." The patient looked up, his eyes locking with Dr. Thorne's. There was a strange depth to his gaze, calmness that Thorne hadn't expected. "I think it might be broken," the man said gently. "I heard a snap," Dr. Thorne scoffed. "Everyone thinks they hear a snap. Adrenaline makes you hear things. Trust me, I've been doing this for 30 years. I know what a broken wrist looks like." Doctor felt a flicker of annoyance. He hated being second-guessed, especially by someone in this man's position. He decided to assert his dominance. "Listen to me," Thorne said, leaning in closer. "I know this game. You come in here hoping for top-tier treatment. You want the VIP experience without the VIP bill. But this hospital is a business, and resources are finite. I'm trying to help you out. If I order an X-ray, you're stuck here until midnight. If I wrap it up, you're home in 20 minutes. Do you really want to sit in that waiting room for 4 hours, just for me to tell you what I already know?" The doctor waited, expecting the man to argue, or maybe to get angry and shout. Instead, the man just sighed. He looked down at his injured wrist, flexing his fingers carefully. "You're right," the man said finally. "I don't want to be a burden. If you think wrapping it is best, then let's do that. I just don't want it to heal wrong." "It won't," Thorne said dismissively, turning to grab a roll of bandages from the cabinet. "I'll make sure it's tight. Just try to be more careful next time. Maybe get a job with a car, or stay off the roads when it rains." "Yes, sir," the man said softly. There was no sarcasm in his voice. He sounded genuinely apologetic, as if he truly felt bad for inconveniencing the doctor. Dr. Thorne began to wrap the wrist, his movements quick and rough. He was thinking about how this interaction was a perfect metaphor for his life. He was the one fixing things, cleaning up messes made by people who couldn't take care of themselves. He felt a weird sense of superiority, but underneath that, a creeping sense of emptiness. He wanted someone, anyone, to challenge him, to show him some spark of intelligence or worth. But this man just sat there, taking it. You know, Thorne said, tightening the bandage until the man flinched again. You seem like a decent guy. You're polite. That's rare. You're probably just down on your luck, right? Economy is tough. Hard to find good work. Something like that, the man replied. Well, do yourself a favor, Thorne advised, finishing the knot and ripping the tape with a loud snap. Get off that bike. Sell it if you have to. Use the money to get a nice suit, maybe get a haircut. You walk around looking like this, people like me are going to treat you like a nobody. The shouting in the hallway was getting louder. It wasn't the kind of noise Dr. Elias Thorne was used to hearing in the emergency room. Usually, the noise was a mix of pain, fear, and exhaustion, people crying out in agony, relatives begging for information, or the rhythmic beeping of machines that signaled life and death, but this noise was different. It was aggressive, entitled, and filled with panic. It sounded like someone who was used to getting exactly what they wanted, exactly when they wanted it, wasn't getting it. Dr. Thorne rolled his eyes, letting out a long, exhausted breath. He had just managed to get rid of the quiet biker, and now he had to deal with this. He grabbed his cup of cold coffee from the counter and took a sip, grimacing at the taste. He considered just walking away, heading into the break room, and locking the door. He could let security handle it. That was what they were paid for, after all. But his curiosity got the better of him. Besides, if there was a security threat in his ER, he was the senior doctor on the floor. He had a responsibility to maintain order. He walked out of the nurse's station, his white coat flapping slightly as he moved. He spotted the source of the commotion near the main sliding doors. A group of 4 people had just rushed in, shaking off raincoats and umbrellas. They were dressed differently than the usual patients. Even in the chaos of the storm, they looked expensive. One man was wearing a tailored blazer over a t-shirt. Another was holding a briefcase high above his head to keep it dry. And 2 women were frantically checking their phones. They were arguing. With the security guard, a large man named David, who usually spent his nights reading a newspaper at his desk. I don't care if the mayor is in there. The man in the blazer was shouting, his face red. We need to know if he is here. Did a biker come in? A motorcycle accident? About 10 minutes ago? Dr. Thorne frowned. A biker? He felt a small prickle of unease at the back of his neck. He walked over, putting on his best I am in charge here face. Excuse me, Dr. Thorne said, his voice loud and firm. He stepped between the security guard and the shouting man. This is an emergency room. People are trying to recover. I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voices or leave. The man in the blazer turned his sharp eyes toward the doctor. He looked Dr. Thorne up and down, dismissing him instantly. Get out of my way. I'm looking for a patient. Everyone here's a patient, Thorne shot back, his annoyance rising. And unless you are family, you cannot just barge in here demanding information. HIPAA laws exist for a reason. Now step back. The man laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound. HIPAA. Listen, buddy. I don't think you understand. The man who came in here. Look, just tell me. Did a guy come in with a broken wrist? Leather jacket? Dark helmet? Dr. Thorne's mind flashed back to curtain 3. The polite man, the old jacket, the wet boots. The wrist he had wrapped up in 5 minutes and sent out into the rain. We treat many people with broken wrists, Dr. Thorne said cautiously, though his curiosity was piqued. Why were these people so interested in a delivery driver or a nobody on a bike? Unless you can give me a name, I can't help you. The man in the blazer stepped closer, his face intense. I think the name you're looking for is Keanu. Dr. Thorne stared at him blankly. Keanu? Yes, Keanu Reeves. For a second, the name didn't register. Dr. Thorne's mind was tired. It was just a name. It sounded familiar, like a song he hadn't heard in years, but it didn't click. He looked at the man with confusion. I don't know what Keanu Reeves, Thorne said, shaking his head. Look, sir, are you saying this man is famous? Because he didn't look famous. He trailed off. The people around him were gasping. One of the women covered her mouth with her hand. He's here? Who's here? She cried out. Oh my God, is he okay? Wait, Dr. Thorne said, holding up his hands. He felt a sudden cold drop of sweat roll down his spine. Keanu, the actor? The guy from the action movies. Yes, that's who I'm talking about. The man in the blazer roared. Where is he? Dr. Thorne felt the ground shift beneath his feet. He took a step back, his heart hammering against his ribs. The quiet man, the polite man. The one he had lectured about getting a better job and selling his bike. The one he had refused an x-ray for because he assumed the guy couldn't pay. The man he had told looked like a nobody. K.K. Reeves, Thorne whispered to himself. The initials on the file he had just filed away. He'd glanced at the driver's license clipped to the bed, but he hadn't looked at the photo. He had just seen a scruffy beard and messy hair. He had judged the book entirely by its cover, and now he realized he might have just made the biggest mistake of his career. He was in curtain 3, Thorne stammered, his voice suddenly weak. But I discharged him. You discharged him? Man in the blazer screamed, making the nurses at the station jump. He has a broken wrist. He was doing his own stunts when he crashed. He needs to be in surgery or something. I wrapped it, Thorne said, his mouth dry. I thought it was a sprain. Said he heard a snap, but he stopped talking. He could hear how ridiculous he sounded. He had ignored a patient's complaint because of the man's clothes. Where did he go? The woman asked, stepping forward. She looked frantic. Did he leave? In this rain? With a broken hand? Thorne said, feeling a wave of nausea. He walked out about 5 minutes ago. The group turned toward the doors, but one of them stopped and looked back at Dr. Thorne. The look wasn't angry anymore. It was pitying. It was the look you give someone who just made a fool of themselves in front of the whole world. You sent Keanu Reeves out into a storm with a broken arm and a lecture, the man asked quietly. Wow. Just wow. They turned and ran out into the rain, leaving Dr. Thorne standing alone in the middle of the ER. Hallway. The silence that followed was louder than the shouting had been. The security guard, David, looked at Dr. Thorne with wide eyes. Clara, the head nurse, walked over slowly. She had heard everything. Dr. Thorne, she said softly. Did you really? I didn't know. Thorne burst out, his face flushing hot with shame. How was I supposed to know? He had a helmet on. Wearing rags, Clara? He looked like a homeless guy. He was so quiet. He let me talk. Clara shook her head slowly. She didn't look angry, just disappointed. Bless, that man is one of the biggest movie stars in the world. He's also known for being one of the nicest. I heard he's in town filming a new movie. If he heard a snap, it was probably broken. And you refused to image it? I was trying to save time. I was trying to help him save money. Thorne defended himself. But even to his own ears, it sounded hollow. I didn't want him stuck here all night. Dr. Thorne rushed back to the nurse's station, grabbed the pile of files, and started frantically shuffling through them. He found curtain 3 and pulled it out. There in the patient box was the ID card he had barely glanced at. He stared at the photo. It was definitely him, Keanu Reeves. Even in a standard DMV photo, he had that same intense, soulful gaze. Dr. Thorne looked at the notes he had scribbled. Patient advised to sell bike. Get a suit. Stop being a burden. Reading the words now with the name attached to them made Dr. Thorne feel sick to his stomach. He had treated a billionaire like a beggar. He had lectured a man who probably owned several cars and a house on the beach about how to look respectable. The irony of it was suffocating. Dr. Thorne spent his life chasing status. He looked up to people with money and fame. He treated the hospital like a social ladder, stepping on the little people to get closer to the VIPs. And tonight, the biggest VIP of all had walked right up to him, sat on his table, and Thorne had spat in his face. But the worst part wasn't the mistake. The worst part was how the patient had reacted. He replayed the conversation in his mind. You fixed my wrist. That's all that matters to me. The memory of the man's voice, soft and forgiving, echoed in his ears. Keanu hadn't gotten angry. He hadn't pulled the "do you know who I am" card. He had just sat there and taken the doctor's advice, apologized for being in trouble, and shook his hand. Dr. Thorne slumped against the counter. Well, he felt small. Like the nobody he had accused the other man of being. We have to find him, Dr. Thorne said suddenly, standing up straight. I have to fix this. I have to check that wrist properly. If it's broken, I need to set it right. I need to apologize. Sir, it's pouring rain, Clara said gently. He could be anywhere. He probably hopped on an Uber or called a friend. I have to try, Thorne insisted. He grabbed his coat. Is my car in the garage? Yes, level B2, Clara said, looking at him with concern. Elias, are you okay? I'm fine, he lied. I need to make this right. Dr. Thorne didn't wait for her to reply. He ran toward the elevators, his mind racing. He thought about the things he had said. Get a job with a car, people like me. He cringed at the memory. He had sounded like such a fool. He had confused appearance with worth. He had spent 30 years practicing medicine, learning how to heal bones and cure diseases. But in the last hour, he realized he had forgotten how to treat people. The elevator ride down to the garage felt like it took forever. The number ticked down slowly. 543. Thorne tapped his foot impatiently. He was sweating. He wasn't worried about a lawsuit anymore. The director hadn't. Dr. Elias Thorne didn't think. He just acted. His foot slammed onto the brake pedal of his luxury sedan, the tires screeching slightly on the wet asphalt. He threw the car into park, not caring that he was double parked in a no-stopping zone. He didn't even grab his umbrella. He pushed his door open and stumbled out into the pouring rain, the cold water instantly soaking through his white coat and dress shirt. Wait, he screamed, his voice cracking. Please stop. He ran toward the single beam of the motorcycle headlight. The rain was blinding, stinging his eyes, but he could see the brake lights of the bike flare red as the rider slowed down. The deep rumble of the engine lowered to an idle purr. Dr. Thorne's heart was hammering against his ribs so hard it hurt. He was breathless, not from the short run, but from the sheer weight of the shame crushing his chest. Here he was, a respected doctor, chasing a patient through a storm like a crazy person. But he knew he had to do this. If he let this man leave now, he would have to live with the guilt of his arrogance forever. The motorcycle came to a complete stop at the side of the road. The rider put one foot down to balance the heavy machine. Dr. Thorne splashed through a puddle, ruining his Italian leather shoes, and ran up to the bike. He was panting, his hands shaking as he reached out. The rider slowly turned his head. Through the blur of the rain and the darkness, Dr. Thorne saw the visor lift. There were those dark, intense eyes again. The eyes he had looked down on just 20 minutes ago. Doctor, the rider asked, his voice calm and confused over the sound of the falling rain. Is everything okay? Did I forget something? Dr. Thorne leaned over, clutching his knees to catch his breath. He looked up, water dripping from his nose and chin. He must have looked like a mess of far cry from the composed, arrogant specialist who had sat on the rolling stool earlier. I made a mistake, Thorne wheezed, gasping for air. A terrible mistake. The rider killed the engine. The sudden silence was heavy, filled only by the sound of water hitting the pavement. The man pulled off his helmet, shaking his wet hair. He looked concerned, not angry. He looked at Dr. Thorne like he was the patient who needed help. Are you all right, doctor? Keanu Reeves asked softly. You're soaking wet. You're going to get sick. Thorne stood up straight, wiping the water from his face with a trembling hand. I'm fine. That doesn't matter. I treated you back there. I treated you horribly. I refused to give you the care you needed because I judged you. I saw the jacket and the bike, and I assumed you were nobody. I assumed you were poor and unimportant. I was wrong. I was so wrong. He waited for the anger. He waited for Keanu to yell at him. He waited for the celebrity to demand his name or threaten to sue the hospital. That is what Thorne would have done in his position. That is what any normal person would do after being insulted and denied medical care. But Keanu just looked at him. He looked at the doctor's expensive car double parked, with its hazard lights blinking. And he looked at Thorne's shivering form. A small, sad smile touched the actor's lips. Dr. Keanu said gently, It's okay. You're stressed. The hospital is crazy tonight. I get it. I didn't exactly look like I was rolling in cash. No, Thorne said fiercely. It is not okay. That's not the point. I'm a doctor. My job is to heal people. not decide who deserves to be healed based on their clothes. You told me your wrist snapped. You told me, and I didn't listen because I thought I knew better. I was arrogant. Thorne stepped closer, ignoring the rain pouring down his neck. Please, he begged. Let me look at it again. Properly this time. If it's broken, it needs to be set. I have a portable kit in my car. Or I can take you back. I'll call an ambulance. I'll do whatever you want. Just, please give me a chance to fix this. Keanu looked down at his own right hand. It was wrapped in the clumsy bandage Thorne had applied in the ER. It was already soaking wet from the rain. He flexed his fingers and winced slightly, a sharp intake of breath that didn't escape Dr. Thorne's notice. It does hurt, Keanu admitted quietly. I think you might be right. I think it is broken. I know, Thorne said, his voice filled with regret. And I left you like that. I'm so sorry. Keanu looked around the empty street. The rain was coming down harder than ever. We can't go back to the ER, he said reasonably. They're swamped. And honestly, I just want to go home. But I don't think I can ride the bike like this. I'll drive you, Thorne said immediately. Wherever you need to go. Just tell me. Keanu hesitated. He was a stranger offering a ride to a man who had just mistreated him. But he also seemed to see the desperation in Thorne's eyes. He saw a man who was breaking down, not just a doctor. Ack. Keanu nodded. But leave the bike here? It's locked. I can come back for it tomorrow. I'll have security watch it, Thorne said, pulling out his phone. I know the guys at the precinct down the street. They'll keep an eye on it. Please, get in my car. You're freezing. Keanu didn't argue. He tucked his helmet under his good arm and walked toward the passenger side of Thorne's sedan. Thorne rushed to hold the door open for him, an act of service he hadn't performed for a patient in years. Once they were both inside, the silence of the car was a relief from the storm. The heater was blasting, warming the cold air instantly. Thorne turned to look at Keanu, up close. Without the helmet and the harsh fluorescent lights of the ER, he looked even more tired. He looked like a regular guy who had a really long day. Thank you, Keanu said, rubbing his good hand over his face. That was decent of you to come out here. I shouldn't have had to come out here, Thorne muttered, starting the car. I should have done my job in the first place. Where to? Head towards the hills, Keanu said, giving a general direction as they drove. The rain lashed against the windows. Dr. Thorne kept glancing over at the passenger seat. He still couldn't quite believe he was driving Keanu Reeves. The reality of it was surreal. He had seen this man in countless movies, fighting bad guys and saving the world. And now, the man was sitting in his passenger seat, wet and hurt because of Thorne's incompetence. So, Keanu said after a few minutes of awkward silence. He turned his head to look at the doctor. Why did you do it? Back there, I mean? Why were you so angry? The question hit Thorne like a punch. He gripped the steering wheel tighter. He had been asking himself the same question for years, but he had never had to answer it out loud. I don't know, Thorne started slowly. I guess. I got tired. I got tired of the system. I see people taking advantage of the hospital, people faking pain to get drugs, people screaming lawsuits. Over the years, I stopped seeing patients as people. I started seeing them as problems. I thought if I was tough, if I was fast, I could filter out the ones who didn't matter. He paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. And tonight, when I saw you, I saw someone who looked like a problem. Someone who wouldn't pay. Someone who would slow me down. I was wrong. I was blinded by my own ego. Keanu listened quietly. He didn't judge. He didn't interrupt. It's funny, Keanu said softly, looking out at the blurry city lights passing by. People spend so much time trying to look important. They buy fancy cars and wear expensive suits because they're terrified of being treated like a nobody. They think if they look like they have money, they'll be treated with respect. Tonight, you treated me like a nobody because I didn't look the part. And honestly, it hurt. But it taught me something too. Thorne glanced at him, surprised. What did it teach you? That maybe I shouldn't be so afraid of being the nobody. Keanu smiled sadly. Because if you can be a famous actor and still be treated like trash, then maybe none of that stuff really matters. Maybe the only thing that matters is how you treat people when you think no one is watching. Thorne felt the words sink deep into his soul. Here was a man who had every reason to be angry, to be bitter, to throw his fame in the doctor's face. Instead, he was using the moment to teach a lesson about humility. "We're here," Keanu said suddenly, pointing to a gated driveway. Thorne pulled the car up to the gate. It wasn't a massive, flashy mansion like he expected. It was a modest, secluded home hidden by trees. It looked private, quiet. "Can you do me one favor?" Keanu asked before opening the door. "Anything," Thorne said. "Can you look at my wrist one more time?" "Right here?" "I really don't want to go to another hospital tonight." Thorne nodded vigorously. "Yes, absolutely." He reached into the glove compartment and grabbed a small flashlight he kept there. He turned on the interior light of the car. It cast a yellow glow over them. Thorne gently took Keanu's hand. He carefully unwrapped the wet bandage, his fingers trembling slightly. As the gauze fell away, Thorne saw the wrist. It was swollen badly, already turning a deep shade of purple. There was a distinct deformity at the edge of the bone. "It's fractured," Thorne whispered, confirming his worst fear. "The radius bone is cracked." "I can feel the crepitus, the rough edges of the bone rubbing together." Keanu looked at it, wincing slightly. "Can you fix it?" "Not here," Thorne said, his mind racing back to his medical training. "I need a proper cast. Or at least a splint and a sling to immobilize it perfectly so it doesn't get worse. I have a first aid kit in the trunk with a splint. Let me get it." Thorne ran out into the rain again, popped the trunk, and grabbed the emergency medical kit he carried for highway accidents. He ran back to the car and returned to the passenger seat. The drive back to the hospital felt different for Dr. Elias Thorne. The rain was still falling, but to him it didn't feel like a nuisance anymore. It felt cleansing. He gripped the steering wheel, but his hands weren't shaking with anger or arrogance anymore. They were steady, but his mind was racing. He kept looking at the passenger seat of his car, imagining Keanu sitting there just minutes ago. He couldn't believe what had happened. He had spent his entire life building walls around himself, judging people by their bank accounts and their appearance. He thought being a somebody meant having power and status. But tonight, a man who had everything, fame, money, influence, had sat in his car and humbled him with nothing but kindness. Keanu had every right to scream at him, to sue him, to ruin his career. But he didn't, just accepted the help and thanked him. When Dr. Thorne pulled into the hospital parking garage, he sat in the silence for a long moment. He looked at himself in the rearview mirror. His hair was wet and messy. His expensive coat was ruined. But for the first time in years, he actually liked the person looking back at him. He felt lighter, as if a heavy weight had been lifted off his shoulders. He took a deep breath, grabbed his medical bag, and stepped out of the car. He walked toward the elevator, his steps purposeful. He wasn't the arrogant Dr. Thorne walking into his kingdom anymore. He was just a man who wanted to do his job. When he stepped back onto the ER floor, the chaos hit him instantly. The waiting room was still packed. The lights were too bright. The noise was deafening. But instead of feeling annoyed, Thorne felt a surge of energy. He wanted to help. He wanted to fix things. He walked past the nurse's station. Clara, the head nurse, was on the phone looking stressed. She looked up and saw him. Her eyes went wide. She hung up the phone quickly. "Dr. Thorne," she whispered, rushing over to him. "Where have you been? The director has been looking for you." "And that producer? The angry one from earlier?" "He came back. He's in the waiting room with the hospital administrator." Thorne nodded slowly. He knew this was coming. "I know, Clara. I saw him outside. It's okay, okay?" "Elias, they are furious," she said, looking worried. "They know you discharged a VIP with a broken bone. They're talking about lawsuits. They're talking about negligence." "I didn't discharge him," Thorne said calmly. "I chased him down. I fixed his wrist in my car. I brought him home." Clara stared at him, her mouth open slightly. "You what? You brought Keanu Reeves home?" "I did," Thorne said. "And I made a mistake earlier, Clara, a big one. But I'm going to fix it. Where's the administrator? In the conference room, she said, pointing down the hall. But be careful, Elias. They smell blood. Thorne didn't hesitate. He walked down the hallway, his head held high. He wasn't going to hide. As he walked, he passed an elderly man in a wheelchair who was wearing tattered clothes. The man was trying to tie a loose string on his hospital gown, but his hands were shaking. In the past, Thorne would have walked right past him, maybe even told a nurse to move him out of the way. But this time, Thorne stopped. He crouched down in front of the man. Here, let me help you with that, Thorne said gently. He tied the string for the man, making sure it wasn't too tight. The old man looked up, surprised. Thank you, doctor, the man whispered. You're a good man, Thorne smiled. A genuine smile that reached his eyes. Just doing my job, sir. Just doing my job. He stood up and walked to the conference room. He took a deep breath and opened the door. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The hospital administrator, Mr. Henderson, was pacing back and forth. The producer from earlier, the man in the blazer, was sitting at the table, looking at his watch. Another man in a sharp suit, who Thorne didn't recognize, was standing by the window with his arms crossed. Dr. Thorne, Mr. Henderson shouted when the door opened. Do you have any idea what kind of mess we are in? Do you know who you treated tonight? Or rather, who you mistreated? I do, sir, Thorne said, walking into the room. He didn't make excuses. He didn't blame the busy schedule or the rain. He stood by the door and faced them. The producer stood up. His face was red. Let me tell you what I know, the producer spat. I know that one of the biggest stars on the planet came to your ER with a broken wrist. And I know that you, some arrogant doctor, decided he wasn't worth your time. You refused him an X-ray. You wrapped him up like a piece of meat and sent him out into the storm. Is that correct? Thorne looked the producer in the eye. Yes, that is correct. The room went silent. The producer was expecting a fight. He was expecting a lie. Thorne's honesty took the wind out of his sails. I judged him, Thorne continued, his voice steady. I saw a man in old clothes on a motorcycle, and I decided he didn't deserve my best effort. I lectured him on his life choices. I told him he was a burden. I was arrogant, rude, and unprofessional. It was the worst mistake I have ever made as a physician. Mr. Henderson sat down heavily, putting his head in his hands. Oh God, Elias, why? Why would you do that? Because I lost my way, Thorne said simply. I forgot that every patient is a human being. I thought I was better than him, but I wasn't. And what happened after? The man by the window asked quietly. He hadn't spoken yet. He seemed calmer than the producer. I realized my mistake, Thorne said. I found out who he was, and I panicked. Not because of the lawsuit, but because I knew I had failed him as a doctor. So, I went after him. Thorne told them the story. He told them about driving in the rain, finding Keanu on the side of the road, and the conversation in the car. He told them about setting the bone and the risk of infection. You set a fracture in the front seat of a car? The man by the window asked, raising an eyebrow. It wasn't ideal, Thorne admitted, but it was necessary. I wasn't going to let him leave with a broken bone because of my mistake. I applied a splint. I called an orthopedic specialist from my car to set up an appointment for first thing in the morning, and I took him home safely. The producer sat down, looking confused. So, you chased him down? In the rain? Yes, Thorne said. He didn't ask me to. He actually told me I was going to get sick, but I had to do it. I needed to make it right. The room was quiet for a long time. Mr. Henderson looked from Thorne to the producer. Look, the producer said, his voice losing some of its edge. We were ready to tear this hospital apart. We were ready to drag your name through the mud, doctor. Keanu is... He's special to us. He's family. We protect him. I understand, Thorne said, and you should. If he wants to sue, I won't fight it. I deserve it. The man by the window pulled out a phone and sent a text. A moment later, it buzzed with a reply. He read it and then looked up at Thorne. Keanu just texted me, the man said. He said, and I quote, "The doctor made a mistake, but he came back for me. He fixed my arm. He's a good man. Let it go." The producer looked at the man in shock. That's it? He's just letting it go? That's who he is, the man said, standing up and walking over to Thorne. He extended his hand. I'm David Keanu's agent. We were worried about him. When we heard he left the ER untreated, we assumed the worst. But hearing what you did, chasing him down, setting the bone, you went above and beyond. Dr. Thorne shook David's hand, still in disbelief. I was just doing what I should have done in the first place. We appreciate that, David said. We really do. But don't let it happen again. Next time, the guy on the bike might just be a guy on the bike, and he deserves the same respect. I promise you, Thorne said, his voice trembling slightly. It won't happen again. Not ever. David and the producer gathered their things. The mood in the room had shifted completely. The anger was gone, replaced by a strange sense of respect. We'll be in touch about the medical bills, David said as he walked to the door. Don't worry, we'll pay them. Triple rate, considering the house call. You don't have to do that, Thorne started. We insist, David said with a small smile. Keanu would want it that way. They left the room, leaving Thorne alone with Mr. Henderson. The administrator looked at Thorne for a long time. You're lucky, Elias, Mr. Henderson said finally. Very lucky. If that actor had been half as arrogant as you are, you'd be looking for a new job right now. I know, sir, Thorne said. I am the luckiest man alive. Mr. Henderson stood up and sighed. Go home, get some rest. You look terrible, and take tomorrow off. You've had a hell of a night. Thank you, sir, Thorne said. He walked out of the conference room and back into the ER. It was morning now. The sun was starting to rise, casting a soft golden light through the hospital windows. The overnight shift was ending. The chaos of the storm had passed. Thorne walked to the locker room to get his things. He took off his wet coat and hung it up. He looked at the mirror again. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear. He thought about Keanu. He thought about the man on the bike. He realized that the lesson wasn't just about being nice to celebrities. It was about being nice to everyone. It was about realizing that everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Everyone deserves to be seen. As he walked out of the hospital to go to his car, he saw a young couple sitting on a bench outside. They looked tired and scared, holding a small baby. They were looking at the map on their phone, trying to figure out where to go for their appointment. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Dr. Elias Thorne's penthouse apartment, catching dust motes dancing in the light. It was a beautiful view of the Los Angeles skyline, a view that usually made Elias feel powerful and successful. But today, as he stood there sipping his coffee, he felt something different. He felt peace. It had been 3 weeks since the rainy night with Keanu Reeves. 3 weeks since his world had been turned upside down and then quietly put back together. Since then, Elias hadn't taken a single day off, but he hadn't worked the way he used to. Before, work was a battle. It was him against the patients, him against the system, him against the clock. Now, it felt like what it was supposed to be, a calling. He walked into his closet. The walls lined with expensive Italian suits and silk ties. His hand hovered over a charcoal gray number, the one he usually wore to intimidate people during staff meetings. But then he pulled it back. Instead, he grabbed a simple pair of slacks and a blue shirt. He didn't put a tie on. He left the top button undone. He didn't need to look like a CEO anymore. He just needed to look like a doctor when he arrived at St. Jude's Medical Center. The energy in the ER was familiar, yet he noticed things he had never paid attention to before. He noticed the way the janitor, an older man with a kind face, was patiently mopping up a spill near the entrance while a visitor shouted at him. In the past, Elias would have walked past, maybe even rolled his eyes at the delay. Today, he stopped. Are you okay, Thomas? Elias asked, using the man's name for the first time in 10 years. Thomas looked up, startled. He held the mop handle with 2 hands. Oh, Dr. Thorne. Yes, sir. Just a little coffee spill. No harm done. Thank you for cleaning it up so quickly, Elias said sincerely. I know how hard you work to keep this place safe for us. Thomas blinked, a slow smile spreading across his face. Well, thank you, doctor. That means a lot. Elias walked away, smiling to himself. It was such a small thing, a few words of kindness, but it felt like a victory. He realized now that for a decade, he had been walking through this hospital like a ghost. Seeing only the problems and never the people, he made his way to the nurse's station. Clara was there, typing furiously on a computer. She looked tired, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. "Morning, Clara," Elias said cheerfully. Clara looked up, wary. "Good morning, Dr. Thorne. You're in early." "I couldn't stay away," he said, leaning on the counter. "How's your mother doing? I remember you mentioned she was having surgery last week." Clara stopped typing. She stared at him. She's doing great. The surgery went well. She's recovering at home now." "That's wonderful news," Elias said, and he actually meant it. "If she needs any specialist consults, you let me know. I have some friends in cardiology who owe me favors." Clara's eyes softened. The hard lines of stress around her mouth seemed to relax. I'll keep that in mind." "Thank you, Elias. You seem different today, lighter." "I feel different," he admitted. Just then, the ambulance bay doors flew open. Paramedics rushed in with a gurney. Trauma 1. Male, age 40, found unconscious in the park. Possible overdose? The old Elias would have jumped into action with adrenaline and judgment, assuming the worst about the patient. The new Elias just moved with calm efficiency. He followed the team into the trauma room, washed his hands, and got to work. He didn't care who the man was or how he got there. He only cared about saving his life. The day flew by. Elias treated a little girl with a broken arm from a playground fall, spending 10 minutes showing her the x-ray and explaining that her bones would be stronger than a superhero's soon. He treated an elderly woman who was confused and scared, holding her hand while he explained her medication. He didn't look at his watch once. He didn't worry about the bill. Around my afternoon, a hush fell over the waiting room. Elias walked out to grab a chart and noticed people whispering and pointing toward the main elevators. A man in a sharp suit and sunglasses was walking through the lobby, surrounded by a small entourage. It was David, Keanu's agent. Elias's heart gave a little skip. He hadn't seen Keanu since that night in the car. He knew the actor had an appointment with the orthopedic surgeon today to get his final cast removed. Elias wasn't scheduled to be part of that appointment, but he felt a pull to go down there. He wanted to see him, not as a doctor treating a patient, but as a friend saying hello. He excused himself from the nurses and headed toward the orthopedic wing on the 4th floor. As he stepped out of the elevator, he saw David standing by the nurses' station, smiling and shaking hands. And there, sitting in a chair in the waiting area, was Keanu. He wasn't wearing a helmet or a leather jacket today. He was wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans. He had a bulky white cast on his right arm, the one Elias had splinted in the car that night. He was reading a magazine, looking completely relaxed. He didn't have an entourage. He was just sitting there, another patient waiting for his turn. Elias hesitated. He didn't want to disturb him. But as if he sensed someone watching him, Keanu looked up. Their eyes met across the busy hallway. Keanu's face lit up. He closed the magazine and stood up, waving Elias over with his good hand. "Yes," Keanu said, his voice warm and welcoming. "You're here." "I heard you were getting the cast off today," Elias said, walking over. "I wanted to make sure everything was healing the way it should." Keanu held up his arm. "Good as new, they tell me. Or it will be once this thing is off. I owe you a big thank you for that night in the car. If you hadn't set the bone, I think I would have been in a lot more trouble." "I'm just glad I caught you," Elias said. "How's the pain? Manageable?" Keanu shrugged. "So, how are things?" "Clara told me you've been terrorizing the hospital with kindness. She says you're a new man." Elias laughed, a genuine belly-deep laugh. "Is that what they're saying?" "I wouldn't go that far. I'm just trying to be better. I realized that night. Well, I realized that I had been walking around with my eyes closed for a long time." "You were open enough to stop and help," Keanu said quietly. "That counts for a lot. Most people wouldn't have bothered. They would have let me go." "Shouldn't have let you go in the first place," Elias corrected him gently. That's the part I'm trying to fix. I want you to know that I'm not just nice to movie stars now. I'm trying to be nice to everyone. The guy on the bike, the lady in the lobby, everyone. Keanu looked at him with a look of deep respect. That's the hard part, isn't it? It's easy to be nice to the famous guy. Everyone wants to be nice to the famous guy. The real test is being kind when there's no cameras rolling. When there's no reward. That's what I'm learning, Elias said. Every day is a test. A nurse opened the door to the exam room. Mr. Reeves, we're ready for you. Keanu nodded. He turned back to Elias. Hey, listen. My cast party is going to be pretty boring. Just me and some ice cream. But I'm filming again next month. If you ever want to come to the set, see how the other half lives. The ones who dress up in costumes and pretend to be heroes. Let me know. I'll show you around. Like that, Elias smiled. But I think I'll stick to my day job for now. I've got a lot of making up to do. Keanu extended his good hand, and Elias shook it firmly. Take care of yourself, Doc. You too, Keanu. Elias watched him walk into the exam room. There were no flashing lights, no red carpet, no screaming fans. It was just a quiet door closing on a hallway in a hospital. But it felt monumental. Elias walked back to the elevator. As he descended, he thought about the journey he had been on. He had spent 30 years climbing a ladder that he thought led to success, only to realize he had climbed it to the wrong building. He had been at the top, looking down on everyone, and he had never felt more alone. Now he felt like he was standing on the ground floor, looking up at everyone, seeing the potential for connection and kindness everywhere. When he stepped back into the ER, the rush hit him again. A trauma was coming in. A family was crying at the reception desk. The phones were ringing off the hook. The old Elias would have felt his blood pressure rise. He would have felt annoyed by the noise. But the new Elias took a deep breath. He looked at the chaos and saw a room full of people who needed help. They weren't numbers. They weren't charity cases. They were human beings. They were someone's father, someone's daughter, someone's Keanu. He walked over to the crying family. He didn't look at his watch. He didn't check his suit for wrinkles. He just knelt down beside them, looked them in the eyes, and said, I'm Dr. Thorne. Tell me what's wrong. I'm here to help. The rain that had started it all was gone now, replaced by the bright California sun. But inside the hospital, Dr. Elias Thorne carried his own weather now. He carried the calm of a man who had finally learned that the most important thing in the world wasn't being known by everyone. It was truly knowing the people right in front of him. And for the first time in his life, he was exactly where he was meant to be.